welcome back. Today's tutorial is a good one. This is the one that a lot of people have been requesting lately. It is the convertible bag. It goes from super cute slouchy shoulder bag to simply pulling on these top straps into a hands-free backpack. So cute. There's no readjusting straps, there's no threading, unclipping, anything like that. It's just pull and go. That is my favorite feature of this whole entire thing. It's a pretty generous size. On the back, you'll notice there was a slip pocket right here. That's for when it's on your shoulder. You got quick cell phone access. This zipper pocket is a generous size as well, but now you can leave that backpack mode on your back and still access your phone. Getting in through here. Flip it around. You do have a couple pockets on the inside. You got a spacious zipper compartment on this back wall. Flip it around again. You've got two slip pockets on this wall. So pretty straightforward, not a whole lot of complicated steps, and it's a pretty rewarding sew. So let's jump into it. I'm going to show you how to do that right now. So I've got all my pieces cut out. Before we start with the D-ring connectors, I do instruct you to cut 4 rectangle pieces so that we can glue them wrong sides together and then cut them down to shape, because I find cutting them as one gives the cleanest edges. If you're using the SVG files, you can just disregard that step, but don't jump right in and cut out, 4 of the D-ring pieces. I do have 2 options in the pattern for the back slip pocket. One is if you're using cotton fabrics, and the other one is if you're using the vinyl, cork, or leather. They are constructed a little differently, so there's an option A and an option B. I'll show you both today. I have both bottom base pieces cut, and I've also cut a piece of the Peltex stabilizer for the bottom. You'll notice it is cut a 1/2 inch shorter to keep it out of the seam allowance, and you'll also notice that because it's Peltex and I happen to be using waterproof canvas, it's pulling away a little bit. So I do recommend in the pattern that we go and we top stitch the Peltex on so it stays attached during the birthing process. So I will be doing that. You can use Decaville Heavy if you have that on hand and you prefer. I just call for Peltex because it's a little bit more less expensive. You have your 2 exterior pieces and then the lining. If you are using SVG files, they are cut to size already, but if you're cutting everything by measurements or using the pattern pieces, we are going to go ahead and trim off a 1/4 inch off the top so that it sits nice and flush inside the bag and the lining isn't baggy. Moving along, I do want to talk about how I've rated this pattern as intermediate because the final step is attaching the D-ring connectors, and we do have to install them with rivets. So I have larges here because it will depend on the thickness of your materials because you're going through quite a few layers. If your D-ring connector isn't extra thick or the materials you're using aren't extra thick, then mediums might be fine. But I do recommend that you keep an assortment of sizes on hand because it'll depend on the thickness of your materials. So this is a large from Tandy Leather, and the post is about 10 millimeters, I believe, and then the medium is about 8, and then the small is 6. So I use smalls for stress points in the bag. That's optional, but you will need some sort of rivet or even Chicago screws. That way you don't need a setting tool to set them. Chicago screws, you just use a Phillips screwdriver, but you will need something to set the rivets at the end. Continuing right along with our prep work, if you're cutting by measurements, I did include a cut chart for rectangle pieces. Obviously the bottom base is oval, so you'll need to print that out. You'll also want to print out the D-ring connector piece because there are landmarks on here that we do use for the final install. And then you'll also need to print out the exterior zipper pocket pattern piece so that we can transfer those zipper boxes onto one of the liner pieces and the back exterior main piece. So that's what I'm gonna do right now. I'm gonna go ahead and take one of the liner pockets of the exterior zipper pocket. I've already marked my center markings. Then I just place my pattern piece onto the wrong side of one of these liner pieces. So we're gonna line these up, make sure the center markings are lined up, and then we're gonna draw the zipper box onto the fabric. I've already cut out this line on my pattern piece so that I can just draw right through it. So we got our line there, and then we're gonna repeat that on the back portion of the exterior main. So line up our center markings, this is crucial. Keep it right on top and transfer the line. Now this one goes on the right side of the back main. There we go. So we'll cut those out in a later step when we're actually doing this pocket. I like to start with the D-ring connectors pretty early on in the process to give it allow it a chance to dry. And also if you choose to paint the edges, we can do however many coats you need as we're progressing through the bag. So for side connectors, I mean, it's not a focal point of the bag. Honestly, I'm gonna put the base coat on because I'm using Giardini brand and it requires a base coat. Just do one layer of the base coat and one layer of color just to hide the raw edges, but it also seals the raw edges to give it more stability on the connector as well. Because I'm using leather, I have a water-based adhesive specifically for leather. This is EcoWell. I got that from Tandy Leather. Just using a wool dauber that I'm going to put all over the back sides of the leather on all the pieces. I like this adhesive because it's water-based, so it doesn't have that obnoxious smell, and I don't feel like I need to ventilate my room, and I'm dying a slow death of toxicity. So here we go. All right. So we cut them a little oversized so that we can trim them down, so we can have those nice clean edges we were talking about. Because even if I try my best and I'm extra careful, like I still don't feel like I get them like perfectly lined up. So I just like to give myself a little wiggle room, be able to trim it down. If you are using a thicker leather, like something like this where it's already thick, you don't have to glue the two layers together. So this one's a double-sided vinyl that's a good thickness as it is. It's got nice firmness to it, so I wouldn't have to glue two layers. This would be just fine. If you have like I said, a thicker leather, one layer would be just fine as well. So whatever your materials are will determine if you need to glue two pieces wrong sides together. This is pretty thin, so now this 2 layers will equal the 1 layer of this double-sided vinyl. So keep that in mind when you're doing your D-ring connectors, but you don't want a really flimsy piece of vinyl that's not interfaced or anything like that, because this is going to be a stress point when you cinch the bag together and you don't want it to tear over time. After you've allowed enough time for the glue to dry, we'll take our pattern piece and line it centered on top and then trace around it. Then you can take some really sharp scissors and cut it down as one, or if you just prefer to do your straight edge ruler and a rotary cutter, you can just take an 1/8 inch off of each side here and just line it up and cut it down. Then you're going to want to transfer your rivet holes as well. And you'll do that to both pieces and get them cut out. Once you have it cut down to size and you've punched your holes, I do like to top stitch it real quick before I start the edge painting, because it's a very easy step to forget to actually top stitch. Once it's glued well and you edge coat it, if you forget to top stitch, it's not the end of the world. But if you're using a glue and you don't top stitch and you don't edge paint, then you do risk it peeling apart when you go to attach it. So let's go do our top stitching now so we don't forget. So I've just top stitched my D-ring connectors. So now I'm going to go ahead and add that first layer of the base coat. Honestly, because it's not a focal point, I could just go straight to the color, but it's yellow, so I don't think that it's going to cover very well. So I'm going to go as you're supposed to and do that base coat first to all edges. And then I'm going to prop these up on their side on Wonder Clips to give them a chance to dry. And we'll move on to another step. And then once, with this brand, the Giardini brand, it takes about 20 minutes to dry. So then as I'm working on the bag, I'll come back, add the other coat of the color. And by the time we're ready to install these at the very end. They'll be plenty dry and ready to go. Next, we're going to prep our shoulder straps. So in the pattern, I do have you cut them 40 inches long. I find that to be a generous sized length to fit most body types. But if you're making it for a teenager or a small child, you will want to cut that down. Or if you want it to hang shorter on your arm or tighter up on your back, cut it down. So as the pattern is written, it's to 40 inches. I personally, for my size and height, I like it cut to 37 inches. But the good thing about cutting it extra long is that when you go to assemble your bag at the end, if you find that it is too long, you just cut down your strap and you attach it then. It's way easier to cut down a strap than it is to find you need a longer strap and you have to like redo it, which by then you've probably already installed your D-ring connectors and it's kind of a nightmare. So trust me on this, go bigger and always cut down if you need to. So in the pattern, I do talk about drawing a center line and using double-sided tape because we're using vinyl, cork, or leather. This is leather. It's a thinner weight one, but it's a perfect thickness for a strap. So I'm going to fold it to the center, so there will be a center raw seam. But if your vinyl is thick enough or thin enough that you can do a 4-fold strap for a completed width of 1 inch, you can feel free to do that. So you would fold it to the center and then you would fold it again and your they would have no raw edges on both sides. But I'm going to do the center seam route on this one. If you want to go super easy, you can just go webbing. And then you don't have to do any of this. You don't have to stitch it and mark centers or anything like that. So, and then there's not a right or a wrong side on webbing. So I'm going to put my double-sided tape down the center on both strips. I tend to just eyeball it. If you aren't so great at eyeballing, draw that center line as I instruct you to do, and then we're going to fold them to the center. When we go to sew the strap, I'm going to sew with the center seam face up and I'm going to sew right next to it. So when I put my needle down, I'll put it just next to that center seam, use that as my guide, and I'm going to go down. I'm using a walking foot machine, so I do go down to the bottom, pivot, and come back up. But if you're using a regular sewing machine, and it doesn't walk along the material, it kind of glides, you will want to stop at the bottom, pick your needle back up, and come up just on this side to prevent your strap from twisting. Then from the right side, I'm going to sew these corner folds an 1/8 inch from the edge, going down and across. Again, pick up your needle and start from sewing in the same direction if you're using a domestic machine. You don't want to not sew the center channel if you're doing this, because if you just sew the outsides first, what happens is it wants to compress it on the side and pulls the centers away from each other, and then you have like a big channel. So that's why I recommend sewing the centers first and then doing the outsides. But I wouldn't only do the outsides, because over time, if your glue or your tape isn't very strong, these center edges are going to poke up and away from your strap, and that's not a good look. Now that my straps are done, we're going to go ahead and baste them onto the base. I am using leather, but it is a very thin leather, so I did not skive around here. But if you're making an all leather bag or you're using leather, anything over 3 ounces, you really want to take a 1/2 inch skive off the seam allowance to make it easier to construct. Same thing with the main body portion of the bag. You want to skive all 4 edges, because you need, up near the D-ring connector, you need it to be really, really thin. You don't want a lot of bulk there. So because we did just the 2-fold method to the center, I want the center seam face up on my base. So I'm going to line up that center seam with our center markings here, and we're going to baste it in place an 1/8 inch from the edge here. Well, mine's a quarter, but we're doing a 1/2 inch seam allowance on the end, so it'll be within the seam allowance, so it's not a big deal, but do as they say, not as they do. All right, so now we're gonna repeat the same process. So this is the right side, center seam, side up, centered all along that edge, and sew it down. Now, to keep the straps kind of out of the way, what I tend to do is like fan fold them a little bit to keep them in the center. And then I'll take some ribbon or string or whatever and just kind of tie them in this way to keep them in the center and out of the seam when I add the base at the end. I'll just be cutting this string off at the end, so it doesn't have to be perfect, but then I set it aside. Okay, your first layer should be dry by now. It's just a reminder to go ahead and add a layer of your color. So anytime I've done a base coat, I will just do a rough sand if there's any bubbles or anything like that, just to get a smooth surface here. And I go much more into detail and take much more precise care of sewing my edges when I'm doing like a pocket pal or a purse pal or something that's going to be a focal point. But for these, they're not. They're pretty much hidden by your strap, so I wouldn't waste too much time on this portion. So I'm going to add my layer of color. Next, we're prepping the exterior slip pocket. So I'm going to show you first the fabric version, and then I will show you the vinyl cork leather version. So I'm going to set option B aside for now. So I did add a woven interfacing to the back of this piece because it's just straight quilt cotton. I cut it out of the seam allowance, but it doesn't end up crazy bulky if you do take it to the edge because you're block fusing. It's not going to make it or break it. But what we want to do is we're going to draw 1-inch lines along these long edges on both sides here. And then we're going to go ahead and press this edge to that line all the way across with our iron. I like to take a craft glue stick and apply a layer of glue so that when I do press it with an iron and the heat, it helps it hold its fold. Now that the long edges are folded to the center, I'm going to fold this short edges right sides together and line them up, and we're going to sew this top seam at a 1/2 inch. Then we're going to press this seam open with our iron and flip it right side out. Press this seam open. So now when I say turn it right side out, we're just going to turn the little loop in on itself. So this seam up here, give it a nice press. That's going to be the bottom of our pocket. Just press everything nice and crisp. And so I'm going to go back to the sewing machine and we're going to top stitch a 1/2 inch from this top edge. Just top stitch this pocket. It's ready to be added to our back, but we're not doing that right now. I'm going to show you option B. So now you're going to grab, if you're doing a leather back or just a leather pocket, you're going to grab this option B pocket piece and we're going to flip it to the wrong side. We're going to draw those 1-inch lines along the long edges, just like we did on the other pocket. And then we're also going to draw a 1-inch line along the bottom edge. So to determine if it's a directional print, keep that in mind. Otherwise, just pick a side to be the bottom and draw that 1-inch line. So because this is leather, I am going to go ahead and use double-sided tape because craft glue stick doesn't really work for leather. So we fold the long edges in first. And you're folding it up to that line. That. And then we do the bottom edge. So when I fold it up to that 1 inch line here, what I'm left with are these little triangles here. So what I like to do is I do just cut them right off to really reduce bulk, and then I hammer them flat. Okay, so we'll hammer those, and then this final top will fold down a full inch, but ultimately, depending on your folding and all that other stuff, it should be 7 inches tall. So here's my ruler. So you're going to fold it down so that you're at the 7 inch mark, which is a 1 inch fold, and then we'll top stitch 3/4 inches down. Okay, now that I've shown you both pockets, we've top stitched this one. Again, you're not doing both, you're not cutting out both pieces. You have to determine if you're doing option A or option B. I'm doing a fabric main body, so I will be using this one moving forward, but I didn't want you to not see how this one was done. So set those aside, and we're going to finish the interior slip pocket portion. Now this one is cut a perfect square, so just pick a side to draw your 1 inch lines on. So we're going to repeat the same process of drawing those 1 inch lines on the back side of your material. I did not add any interfacing to this piece because it is waterproof canvas. If I was using quilt cotton, you would see interfacing on this. So I'm going to use the double-sided tape because it's waterproof canvas as well. Like before, we're folding it right up to that line. Okay. Then we need to fold it in half, lining up these center markings. And we clip that in place, and we're just gonna baste this edge together at the sewing machine, 1/8 inch from the edge. I just basted the top raw edges. Now I'm gonna take the accent strip that we cut out in our leather, cork, or vinyl, and I'm gonna draw a center line down the strip. Then, I mean, you're welcome to use, fabric tack glue or whatever, but I just find that double-sided tape saves me so much time and waiting for glue to dry. So this is the 1/8 inch tape that I just add to both bottom edges of the wrong side. So remove the paper backing. And then we're going to take the raw edge and lay it down centered on this up to that center line. Okay, didn't center that well. Right there. Press it into the adhesive and then roll this over. Now we're just gonna top stitch that in place. We've just top stitched that along the bottom edge there. So now we're gonna go ahead and fold this in half and find our center so we can draw a center line so we can create 2 equal slip pockets. I'm using a chalk mark pen here, just gonna draw that line. And we are done with this pocket for now. Now I'm gonna take one of the interior main liner pieces. Remember, we've already cut off a 1/4 inch from the top and I added the center markings to the top and the bottom. We're gonna go ahead and add our set of slip pockets to one of these liner pieces. So we wanna measure 5 inches down and then add our pocket there. We wanna account for that slouch part of the bag and we don't want our pockets to interfere with that. So finding the center here, I did add a piece of the 1/4 inch or the 1/8 inch double-sided tape because I'm using waterproof canvas and I can't really pin it into this. So I find my center and I'll just press it into place this way. So now we're gonna go to the sewing machine and we're gonna sew along this edge an 1/8 inch from the folded portion all the way down and up here. And then what I do like to do is take a few stitches over and come back down and do an additional row along a 1/4 inch from that. Then we're gonna go up the center and back down and create the 2 separate slip pockets. If you don't want to do the 2 rows of stitching, you don't have to, but then it gives me a little channel from the stitching where I can punch holes and add rivets because these are where the stress points are of a pocket. So I do like to rivet this part, but again, if you backstitch well at each of these spots, you wouldn't have to use rivets. So I did go ahead and add the rivets to the top stress points. Again, those were optional. Just want to show you what that looks like. We're going to set that aside now. And we're going to work on the opposite side of the liner for the zipper pocket. So I have my 2 zipper pocket liner pieces. I have the overlay for the zipper. This is my 9-inch zipper and a zipper pull. So to start, we'll go ahead and add some double-sided tape to the back side of the overlay. We're going to do it on the top edge. So this is the 1/8 inch so that it's small. Okay, and now just like with the other pocket, we're going to have to measure 5 inches down and center this pocket on this panel here. So I'm going to peel the adhesive backing off here and lay this centered. So then I'm just kind of eyeballing where my center mark is and that I've got equal gaps on each side here so that I know I'm centered. There you go. So now we're going to go ahead and go to our sewing machine and we're going to sew just around the outer portion of this box. But I don't like to start backstitch on the start and stop points because then you see a bulky row of stitching there. So I just leave the threads long and then I give it a gentle tug from the back side, pull it off and knot them in the back. So then there's no back stitching on the start or the ends. All right, so it almost looks centered, but it's not. This area is longer than this area, so keep oriented. You don't want to accidentally get it where it's too low. So this is the right side up. Now we got to cut a little slit in here and then cut this backing away. So I flip it to the wrong side. Get my scissors up into there. And don't cut your facing, but you want to cut just up to your tape line. And cut all of this interior portion away. Here we go. Then I'm going to add another layer of this narrow tape in the center of this portion. I'm going to sew close to the zipper box, so I want to keep the tape out of my stitching, so I'm putting it a little bit higher here. so this portion is done. Now we're going to grab the zipper lining pieces. We've got our center markings on both of these and then the 9-inch zipper. So I'm going to fold this in half just so I can find the center of this zipper as well. I'm going to leave the pull off for now because I find it easiest to just sew it on and not have to work around the pull, the zipper pull yet. So with the zipper face up, I'm going to lay it on the right side of the liner, and we're going to line up these center markings. So there's going to be a little bit of excess on each side, and we're going to base this in place right here. Then we're going to take this opposite side and line up the center on the right side as well, so that the zipper will be faced up and the liners right sides will be facing each other. So we're going to do that right now. Right, lining those centers again. You can use double-sided tape if that helps, but you want to do it either close to the edge, an 1/8 inch or 1/4 inch. You don't want to get really close to the zipper because that will show in your zipper box. So the zipper is face up on top of the liner that is also face up. And then I'm going to repeat with this one. So face up, just like this. We're going to take the opposite center mark and lay that lined up as well. So then just make sure that these edges are lined up and then repeat. Sorry, I hit my light, so now the lighting is weird. Okay. All right, so now if you open this up, you got wrong side up, and the right side of the zipper here. So the inside of the pocket will have the linings facing each other. So now I need to add my zipper pull, and then we can install the rest of our zipper. Because I had pulled the zipper pull off so I didn't have to sew around it, I do have to add it on. And I'm going to thread it from the right side going to the left because I want the zipper pull on the left-hand side. I already know that that's not a good install, so I'm just going to take it off and do it again until I get the edges to line up. Move it to the left-hand side and press this. I'm using waterproof canvas, so this kind of wants to pop up. But now we're going to take the liner piece, and I'm going to peel off the bottom edge first so that I can center it on my zipper. So let's move this pull out of the way. So we want the zipper ends to have an overhang equally on in the box. So now I'm just going to flip it up like this and line the bottom edge of this box right on the zipper tape. It's nice and even all the way across. And then I fiddle with it until I like the way it looks before I go ahead and remove the other tape, because otherwise this tape wants to stick down and gets in the way. So now I peel this off and repeat with the top edge. So there's a nice even gap above and below the zipper. Now is the time to make sure it's not wavy, that the zipper's not doing this, that it's nice and even on top and bottom before we go and sew this. So now that I like that, I'm going to go ahead and put both liners towards the top. You should see both of them face up. And then we're going to go to the sewing machine and we're going to drop our needle down right down here and sew a straight line across and leave the threads long so we can tie them off on the back side here, but we're stopping once we get here. So this is the top of the panel. It's the shorter gap. This is the longer gap. I've got both liners pulled to the top. So now I'm going to put this under my machine and I'm going to drop my needle down right where I would come down on the other side next to the zipper box opening. And I'm not back stitching, so I have to leave my threads long so I can pull them to the back side. And then every time you stop, put your needle in the down position so that you can move stuff out of the way and you don't lose your spot. And finish this off. So there's no back stitching. I left them long enough that I could pull gently and create that loop, pull it up, and tie it off. All right, so again, orient yourself correctly so that they were still pushed to the top. Now we're going to go ahead and press them well to the other side. So I want to finger press this portion down and then lay this part on top of it. So now they're all coming down. So we left off over here. We have to spin our panel down and around. Get our threads ready. And then right where we left off, I'm dropping my needle in that hole. And then we're starting right where we left off. Now we're going to come up this side and down this side. Put your needle down anytime you're moving. And we're going to stop right back where we came. I like to just go over one stitch so I can ensure that I'm on the right spot. So one stitch over. Okay. And same thing, we left our threads long. There's no back stitching on this front. We're going to pull these off and tie them off. So now I know I'm oriented correctly because my zipper pulls to the left, but this is a shorter gap than this one. So let's flip it over and you will notice that the underside portion is a 1/2 inch longer. So we're going to trim this up to be even. And if this is quilt cotton, then you would just press these a 1/2 inch to the wrong side, each liner piece, but I'm using waterproof canvas, so I need a little bit of tape to help hold that fold. So I'm going to add that to the bottom edge on both of these pieces. So fold it up a 1/2 inch, just like this. And line this bottom edge even with that one. All right, so now we're gonna go back to the sewing machine and we're gonna fold the top edge over and we're gonna get as close to the zipper as possible and sew this edge. What I tend to do is I start here and then I taper out because this will be our turning hole. We're gonna unzip the zipper, we're gonna leave the bottom edge unsewn and flip the whole bag through this. So I like to leave this space as wide as possible. So we'll start up here, kind of taper off to the edge, backstitch really well here, and then we're gonna flip this over and then repeat the same process over here. You should now have a nice lined, no raw edge zipper tape and usable pocket, except for we left this open for turning. So we're gonna leave the zipper open and set it aside. Now you're gonna need the exterior back portion that we drew our zipper box on, and then the 2 exterior zipper pocket lining pieces. So one should have the zipper box cut lines on it, one should not. We're just gonna set the one that doesn't have the box on off to the side for now, and we need to go ahead and cut these lines. So this one is gonna actually be the lining to the back side of this pocket. That is why we traced it on the wrong side here. So we need to press these zipper box cut lines to the back side of each of the fabric so that when this is pressed open and this is pressed open, this will be the lining, the back side of the lining of this pocket. Double-sided tape on this because it was waterproof canvas, and I pressed it to the side. On this one, because this is straight quilter's cotton, I did add woven interfacing, and then I did the fusible fleece. So pressing these to the back can be a little bit more difficult. That's why the craft glue stick really does help with this. But before we move on and install the zipper in the back zipper pocket, we want to make sure that we pressed and cut our lines pretty accurately. So you line up these center markings along the bottom and just double check your window. So bottoms are accurate and the sides are accurate, because when we go to install our zipper, you're going to kind of do that blind, but by cutting it the way that we do, you should be able to catch them pretty easily. So now we're not going to install the zipper yet. We just have these prepped because we need to do our back slip pocket first, but we need this landmark in order to center it properly. Now, I told you I'm going to use the fabric version because this is all fabric. It doesn't really matter whichever. Now I'm torn. I actually like that. Let me think about this. But anyways, you're going to center it off 1 inch and 1 inch up, so it lines up with the bottom of the pocket, the zipper box. So 1 inch up, 1 inch over, and then you either pin it in place, or I might add a little bit of double-sided tape right in the center here to keep it out of the stitch line. But I think I might do this one. I'm going to do this one. So just double check. It's 1 inch from this edge of the box, and then it is 1 inch up. Now I'm going to go back to the sewing machine and I'm going to sew along these 3 edges. Obviously leave the top open because it's a pocket. I'm going to do an 1/8 inch from the edge, and then I do like that double row of stitching, and I'm going to go ahead and add some rivets here because those are stress points on the pocket. I did add double-sided tape down, so this holds it in position. So let's go sew that on right now. Now that the pocket is on, we can install our zipper. So grab your 8-inch zipper. I'm going to add some double-sided tape to the very edge of the zipper tape here, because when it's under here, it's going to be all the way over here, and we're going to sew fairly close to the box, within an 1/8 to 1/4 inch, to make sure we catch both sides. But your needle should still be far enough away from double-sided tape. Otherwise, you can use, glue. You can use the glue stick or fabric tack to kind of hold your zipper in place. Okay. So it's helpful if you start with one side and then you position. So we want the zipper pull to the top. So this is the top of the bag. And we're going to center it over the box. So we should have a 1/2 inch overhang on both sides. So I need to move my pull out of the way and just lay it down. So that side looks good. And then we can remove the tape on this side. And position that one in place as well. All right. So look it over, make sure your zipper isn't wavy. Mine looks a little wavy, so I'm going to just move this a little bit until I get it how I want it. I don't want it wavy. And now is the time to adjust a wavy zipper before you sew it in. All right, so that looks good. So remember, our zipper box this is the right side, so we need to center it right on top. So in order to do that, now that the box is actually hidden, we're going to line up these center markings along the bottom, right here, and then you can eyeball it that it is right over your zipper box too. So we'll clip these in place, And then if it helps, you can always add double-sided tape to this side of the zipper and hold that in place as well. I think I'm going to probably go ahead and do that just to ensure that it doesn't slide. But we're going to clip the bottom edge and then go sew from the right side. So I've got it lined up and clipped in place. So now I'm going to go ahead, and I usually like start at the bottom. You can start wherever you want. And I'm not crazy close to this edge, but keep in mind we only press the zipper box a 1/4 inch, so you do want to make sure you catch that, but we want to catch the lining too, so I kind of go in between those measurements. Needles down so I can move the zipper out of the way. Coming up to the corner, again, put your needle down so you can pivot. And once I come back to my bottom stitching, I tend to just go over a stitch or two. All right, the moment of truth, flip it over, see if you caught all sides. So now that the zipper is installed, we're gonna add the back side of the lining. So this is the right side, this is the wrong side. So we're gonna sandwich it right down on top. We're gonna clip all of these edges lining up the centers here, and we're gonna sew up and across and down. But before we get to the bottom, then we're gonna clip them all as one and flip it over and baste it 1/8 inch along the bottom so that they're all together. So again, right sides to right sides. So we gotta sew. I usually sew with this upside, with the exterior up, and then I just fold it out of the way as I sew around all the edges. Before we sew the bottom, we want to put the exterior down on top. And there you go. You should have a lined, usable pocket. Now we do the 2 pockets on the back because I really need an easy access pocket for my phone. So when it's in the shoulder carry position, the slip pocket's nice and convenient. But when it is on my back, I can't leave it on my back and still get into this pocket for my phone. So that's why we added the zipper pocket, so you can easily unzip it while it's still being worn and get in and out of that. But if you don't want a zipper pocket and you just want to stick with the slip pocket, make sure to center this on the back panel. We did it this way so that the whole pocket feature is centered, but if you're just doing the slip pocket, move it over so it is centered. Now we're gonna prep our main zipper access. So we have 2 zipper tabs and then we have our last 13-inch zipper. So we're gonna lay the zipper tabs right sides down on top of each end of our zipper, and we're gonna sew it a 1/2 inch seam allowance. Then when you press it open and away, we're gonna fold it back halfway, meeting up that raw edge of the tape, and fold it again and top stitch. We're not adding any length, so when it's all said and done with the tabs added, it should be still 13 inches. So the two folded edges are the same. So when we top stitch here, we should definitely catch that back portion. Okay, and repeat with this end. Last but not least, I tend to measure it 13 inches. Okay, last but not least, go ahead and fold your zipper in half so you can find your center points. Just cut little markings. You can mark it with a pin if you'd like. And then we're gonna need the front exterior and the liner piece with the slip pockets. So I do like to add a piece of the narrow double-sided tape so that I can keep everything in position. But we're gonna lay the zipper face down, centering up the markings on this. So you should have a pretty large gap on each side. Then we'll take the liner piece and sandwich that zipper. And because I will have the double-sided tape up here, then I will just press these down and then clip the rest, and then we'll sew a 1/4 inch seam allowance. This portion we're doing the 1/4 inch seam allowance. As I'm sewing, I'm feeling for the zipper pull so that I don't catch it and I can stop and move it out of the way. So I'm coming up to that. Keep your needle down. Move the pull out of the way. Now, for typical zippy pouches, you're probably used to pressing both pieces away from the zipper and top stitching through both layers. But for this bag, we're not, because we need this this portion to be able to open nice and flat over here. So I'm just pressing the top away from the zipper, and then I'm going to top stitch only through the exterior, leaving the liner going in the opposite direction. Then after I've done that, then I will press this away from the zipper. Okay, so now we're going to repeat the same process with the back portion and the opposite liner. Okay, so now we have the linings attached, the zipper is in. Now, at this point, you're going to want to figure out if you want to add your label. If you're going to add it to the back somewhere, to the lining somewhere, do it now before you add the bottom bases. So if you do it on the front, I wouldn't encourage you to put it up top because there's that slouch and you're not going to really see it well. So I would encourage you to do it somewhere along the bottom. And because it's a rounded base, you don't want to put it really close to the side seam. So you want to measure in at least 4 inches and probably a good 1.5 inches up before where you put your label. So I'm going to go for 2 inches up, 4 inches over, and that would put me about here for my label if it's off center. Otherwise, find your center and go 2 inches up. Okay, so I'm going to go ahead and open my zipper because we're going to be turning the bag through this. And now we want to take right sides together of the exterior and right sides of the lining together. And we're going to line up this whole side seam. Now, I do tend to like to add a little piece of double-sided tape temporarily to the side because we will be pressing that edge open. But temporarily, it is nice to put it right at this seam so that when I'm sewing up the side, it doesn't shift out of place because you really want this area to be nice and lined up. So I will line up those and press it in place. I'll do this on both sides and then clip this whole edge. Then we're going to go to the sewing machine and we're going to sew up both long edges using the same 1/2 inch seam allowance. We're going to leave the bottom edge unsewn because that's where we're going to add our oval base. So now we have to remove that tape that if you used it, because we have to do our best to press this seam open flat as possible. I tend to just put double-sided tape along both edges to press this area open, and it's more so important that you press this top portion open because this is where the D-rings are going to be threaded in, the D-ring connectors. So just doing the easy route with the double-sided tape, and I will press it all open, or you know, press the cotton fabric with your iron. Alright, so I pressed everything away, and then you probably noticed that I took a mallet and I'm really pressing this side seam down as best as you can because you want this area to be very flat for the D-ring portion. So do what you can to pound those seams. Okay, so now we're going to go ahead and add our bottom base to both pieces. This 3-inch section along both corners is going around the curve, so I do tend to like just cut little bitty quarter-inch snips into the bottom portion here. We're taking a 1/2 inch seam allowance, so don't cut any more than a 1/4 inch, and you shouldn't have any issues going around these curves. So when we add our base, so this is the exterior right portion, so I'm going to grab that piece. I find double-sided tape just is a game changer for me. I joke that half my bag is held together with double-sided tape, but we do stitch stuff. So I'm going to peel off the top row, and we're going to line up the center markings along the straight edge, of the oval base, and then these side seams are going to line up with this portion here. So we want them right sides together. So I'm going to push this right side inside, and we're going to line up those center markings. So then I will press it into the tape along this straight edge here. You can use clips, you can staple it, whatever you want to get this to not shift on you. Do whatever's easiest. So then we're going to take the corner and line it up here. And then I'll ease in these snips here. Then line up this center marking. Let's peel off this adhesive first. I'm taking the whole thing off. Shoot. It's not going to work so well for me, probably. Okay. Center markings, straight edge, and then the corners. Line those up. Side. Press everything into the adhesive. It sticks better on the canvas or leather if this wasn't leather exterior, but it usually works pretty well for me using the tape. So if you choose to staple, keep it a 1/4 inch or less because you don't want to sew your staples, and then we're trimming down the seam allowance, so you'll cut those staples right off. So Now I'm going to take it to the sewing machine, and with the base face down, I'm going to sew around here. And I go really slow and take my time making sure not to sew any pleats going around the curves on this exterior portion. And I tend to sew a little bit faster, not caring so much about the pleats on the bottom portion, but the exterior is where you want to really take your time so that you sew the rounded corners really well. So when I'm sewing on the base, I tend to take a really narrow seam allowance just to get it stitched down and how I want it, and then I'll come back at my true 1/2 inch seam allowance. Making sure you're finger pressing this exterior flat so you're not sewing any pleats as you go around the curve. Now that I'm not worried about it shifting anymore because it's actually stitched, I'm going to go back around and do a 1/2 inch seam allowance. We got the both bases on. I've trimmed this one down to a 1/4 inch seam allowance. Now we're just going to finish trimming the liner base down, and then we turn the bag right side out through the hole we left in the bottom of the interior pocket. This first row of stitching was kind of my basting stitch, if you will. That first row I went down really close to the edge, keep everything in place, and then I went back in and did my 1/2 inch seam allowance. Okay, let's turn it right side out. So we've turned it right side out. I've tucked the lining down deep into the bag, and now we need to finesse these corners a little bit because this is where the giant hole is we left, so we can install our D-ring connectors. So we need to pull these out, and that's why it was so important to hammer these seams down so that they're not really bulky. So I'm using my fingers to kind of really press it smooth there. And you have to repeat with the other side. If it helps to go in through the pocket to push up the corners, do that. There we go. So you should have a pretty generous sized hole here, a nice gap so that we can thread our D-rings here. Okay, so now I'm just going to go ahead and cut that string so that my straps are free. All right, so when I said you had to cut your pattern piece for the D-ring connector, there's a landmark on it, this little T shape. So we are going to line up this T, the top of the T, with the very top portion of this right here. And then the bottom portion of the T gets lined up with the seam. just like this. So the top of the seam lined up with the seam, and then we're gonna mark our holes with our marking pen on both sides. So I've added the hole markings on here, and I've made sure that the seams are lined up on the inside here with my finger. They're tucked nicely in there. So this channel is big enough for me to stick this portion of my rotary punch in down and punch my hole on both sides. But if you don't have a rotary punch and you've got that Japanese hole puncher or a standalone punch and a mallet, I want to show you how I do it both ways so you have that option, because we can't move this out of the way. So holding it nice and flush, I'm going to take my rotary punch, stick it in the hole, and line it up with the markings I already drew on my bag. And punch. Slide it over, punch the other hole. All right, so now I have 2 holes on this side. For this one, in the instructions, I'll tell you to kind of push this corner in on itself instead of turning the whole bag right side out. So you're gonna push it down like this, and then you can lay it down flat on the corner of your work surface, or insert your mallet or your rubber mat or something in there. And then you can take this and punch it, your holes that way. But you want to move the back side of the bag out of the way, put it over your rubberized surface, and then punch your hole. Now that I've got both sets of holes punched, I need my 2 D-rings. Decide which way is the right side and the wrong way. Since I pulled my threads to the back and then singed them, I have that bulky part. That's going to be the wrong side. So we're going to fold them like this. So then you take your rivet and you're going to thread them through the portion that's going to get fed into this inside of the bag, just like that. And we're going to tuck it inside this hole, just like that. Now you're going to have to position it. I hope I don't get the top of my head in the camera. But now you're going to look for the hole on the inside of the bag and push it through. You have to do that on both sides. And this rivet is really long, and it may end up being too long, and I might swatch it out for a medium, but I gotta test fit it first. So you can see them through. Now we're gonna take 2 D-rings and thread them on top, just like this. And then you're gonna fold this back over and push this through. So I have quite a bit of posts left pushed through. That might be too long. I might swap it out for a medium, but we want to be able to hear those caps snap on. So if it was barely poking through and you could barely fit your cap on, it's not a long enough post. You will need a longer post, because if you go to set that, odds are it's going to pop off because it won't have enough to grab onto. So make sure you pick the right size post. I'm going to swap them out to a medium, I think, because that might be too much. All right, so I swapped them out for a medium. And now I still need to be able to feel this click on, and I could feel that. There's gotta be enough. But my worry with too long of a post is when you try to set it, what happens is they set offset, and you got a cap over here and a cap over here, and that's not a strong set. So making sure you have the right size post is really important. So now that its caps in place, I'm gonna use my hand press, and you just gotta feed it underneath here. So if your post is long, what I find is once I seat it in the hole, I can feel it with my hand underneath. I compress this part all the way down. This part gets pressed all the way down so that I know it's not going to wiggle, and then I know it's seated correctly before I actually set it. So I feel it in there, and I push it all the way down before I set it with my hand. And then I'm going to do the same thing with this side. Seat it all the way down and press, and then thread it out. If you don't have a hand press, you can set it with those manual tools. There's a little anvil that you would set inside here and put it on your work surface and hammer it. Okay, now we've got one set on. We need to do the other side. Got our D-ring connectors on, but before we make our straps convertible and sew them in place, I want to pull the pocket up and close that before our straps are in the way. So we're going to go ahead and take this to the machine, close this up before we do our straps. Okay, last but not least, my favorite part, the magic straps. So we're gonna take one end, it doesn't matter if you start with the left or the right, but you're threading it through both D-rings on one side, okay? then you're taking this end and you're looping it over the D-ring closest to this side. So we're gonna loop this around and we're gonna do about 1 inch overhang and clip this in place. This is also the time where you can see how long your strap is, if it's too long for you, and adjust accordingly before you set this. So now we take this other loose end, thread it through the outside D-ring only, come across, and we're gonna wrap it around the D-ring closest to this side once again. So this will go around and under, just like this, 1 inch overhang, and you clip. So when you grab them together, so just like any of your guys' bag, it's got great structure as it is right now. We have to train it for the slouch. So I'm gonna show you that after we go ahead and set the strap, okay? So you either punch 2 holes and set 2 rivets here, or you can take it to your machine and do a row of stitching. I'm gonna go ahead and set it with rivets. So like I mentioned before, right now it's got really good structure. It can stand straight up on its own. So when you see pictures like that you think you used too much interfacing, you didn't. You have to train it. So what you want to do is you want to fill your bag with, you know, tissue paper. I'm grabbing a blanket just to fill the bottom and give it a little oomph down there. Okay, so then you close your thing and then you have to train this. So I like to pinch it here at the zipper and then push it down. And that's how you get your nice slouch. So you have to decide how you want it to look. But when you keep it stuffed this way and you store it that way, it will naturally assume that same slouch position. And you got your backpack. Ta-da!